Excellent. Well, here we go. Good evening, everybody, and a really warm welcome to the Frick Collection this evening, and indeed to the Stephen A. Schwarzman Auditorium. So this is one of the first really lecture events that we're having here this evening, and it's so wonderful to see the house full and crowded and all the interest that we're having for tonight's lecture, which is of course taking place on the occasion of the opening today of our new exhibition, Vermeer's Love Letters. As I was also already saying this morning to the press, it is sort of, we are revealing the Frick, as it were, in stages, like peeling an onion. You know, every week there's another dimension of the Frick, another peel of the onion that we are revealing. We've done that with the museum, and then of course, you know, the cafe was launched, the auditorium was launched, of course also with our concert series in the beginning, and now it is time for us to reveal our exhibition galleries, our new Ronald S. Lauder Exhibition Galleries, that allow us now really for the first time to have slightly larger and more ambitious exhibitions in dedicated spaces without having to remove precious works from our collection display in order to accommodate exhibitions, as we have been doing in the past. So it's a major change also for the Frick collection, and allows us really to be even more professional and have, you know, a wonderful and ambitious exhibitions program. And the inaugural exhibition for that is, of course, Vermeer's Love Letters, which is the first Vermeer exhibition here in New York City since 2001. And I realized I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Axel Rüger, actually, the Anna Maria and Stephen Callan, director of the Frick Collection. And why this occurs to me now is because I was going to talk about myself, which is the sheer fact that I actually was lucky enough to have been involved with the previous Vermeer exhibition here in New York City in 2001. Some of you may remember it at the Metropolitan Museum, our neighbors across the street, which was called Vermeer and the Delft School. And as much as we did then, taking advantage of the considerable holdings of paintings by Vermeer at the Metropolitan Museum, we're also doing this here now because, of course, you know, the linchpin to the exhibition is our own, one of the three Vermeers in our collection, the Mistress and Maid, the largest Vermeer in the collection, and incidentally also the last picture that Henry Clay Frick acquired for the collection. So all of it has sort of specific meaning, if you like, and many things are coming together in full circle with this exhibition. And that work from our collection is, of course, then joined by two exceptional loans. Vermeer being one of the most desirable, the most fascinating, wonderful old master artists, painters really in the world. So you can imagine it is not easy to persuade your colleagues to part with their treasures, because usually those works are the main magnets also for their collections. But we managed to persuade the Rijksmuseum to lend their love letter, as well as the National Gallery of Ireland in Dublin to part with their woman writing a letter with her maid. And that the whole exhibition is, of course, on the subject of love letters and of the interaction of the figures. Tonight is, of course, about our guest speaker. A word about him in a second. He is our guest speaker, our guest curator, and he has worked, as it were, hand in hand with Dr. Amy Ang, our John Updike curator here at the Frick Collection, who has done many exhibitions, but now is also the curator responsible for the show here. And, of course, with everything we do at the Frick, we need support from many people who are our friends, our members, our patrons. If you aren't yet, there's always an opportunity to join the Frick. But this exhibition has been supported so generously by the Jasmine Charity Trust in memory of Regina Jaglom Wachter, and we're extremely grateful for them for their support. But now really to our speaker, Dr. Robert Fucci, who comes to us from the University of Amsterdam, where he is a lecturer in Dutch and 17th century Dutch and Flemish art. He earned his PhD here in New York City, actually, at Columbia University, as did Dr. Ang as well. I think they were sort of classmates almost at the time. So again, you know, something coming full circle, as it were, here. And Dr. Fucci has curated a number of exhibition and written exhibition catalogs on, for example, Rembrandt's Changing Impressions, on Rembrandt's printmaking at the Warlock Art Gallery at Columbia, and an exhibition drawn to life at the Ackland Art Museum in Chapel Hill and the Rembrandt House Museum in Amsterdam in 22-23, and has contributed essays to Vermeer on Reflection, which was an exhibition at our colleagues in Dresden around their painting, and Becoming Rembrandt, Creativity and Competition in Amsterdam, 1630 to 55, which took place in Frankfurt and Ottawa. And so finally, of course, he is also the author to the book that accompanies the exhibition, Vermeer's Love Letters, which we have published in collaboration with Rizzoli. And I can only recommend, of course, he will give you a lot of chapter and verse on the exhibition, but if you want to go deeper and remind yourselves again, the book is, of course, available in the shop. So with that, once again, a warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and please join me in welcoming now Dr. Robert Fucci. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Axel, very much for that introduction. And I should also thank everyone here at the Frick for the wonderful job that they've done in putting this together. The exhibition, it looks amazing. The renovation looks amazing. My role as guest curator, I should say up front, it's a very generous term to call me a guest curator. I had the pleasure of writing the book, but this wonderful team at the Frick handled everything around the exhibition itself, and I cannot be more pleased with the job that they have done. So thank you. And it's also a great pleasure to see all of you, who I have to say, it's the first group of people I've spoken to in a while who are not looking back at me wondering, will I be tested on this? So, without further ado, we will talk about Vermeer. I'd like to start with a story about Vermeer. It's one that's been known from the documents for quite some time, but it doesn't get told very often. And the story is this. In 1672, there was a group of Italian Renaissance paintings by major figures: Michelangelo, Raphael, Paul Giovane, Titian. They were being offered for sale in Amsterdam by a dealer, Hendrik Allenberg. And he managed to get a major collector, the German prince Friedrich Wilhelm, the great elector of Brandenburg, to have interest in this collection. And he put a deposit down, took the paintings, and his local art expert looked at them and said, "These are not originals. These are second and third-rate copies." Now, the German prince tried to return the paintings, and Allenberg refused to take them back. And a legal battle ensued. Depositions were taken by notaries. Art experts were called in, artists were called in for their opinions, and an art history showdown ensued. Many of the names are recognizable who participated in this gathering of opinions. To those of you who know a bit about 17th century Dutch history, one of the people that looked at the paintings was Constantijn Huygens, the leading diplomat of the Netherlands at the time, the father of Christiaan Huygens, the famous scientist, and an art connoisseur in his own right. He reassured everyone that Allenberg's paintings were indeed worth the enormous prices that were being asked for them. He felt confident in saying that. That same day, actually, Vermeer and his colleague from Delft came in to the Confrérie Pictura, the Artists Guild in The Hague, where the paintings were hung up. We have the price list. It actually survives. They are rather enormous sums. And this is what he said to the notary. These are actually Vermeer's only recorded words from his mouth, as far as I know. Are you ready? Not only not outstanding paintings, but rubbish. Grote vaden, he said in Dutch, large rags, like, ouch. And bad paintings not worth by far the 10th part of the proposed prices. And in fact, he refused to put a price on the paintings because he said they're basically worthless. Now, I know what you're thinking. What an enormous snob. But he was very much firm in his opinion and clear-eyed about what he thought. This we can take. It has been very hard to track down many of these paintings, but there is one that survives in a private collection in Amsterdam, and it is a second or third rate workshop copy. So, Vermeer was called in because he was the head man or dean of the Guild of Artists in Delft at the time. It was a position that he held twice. They're 2-year terms, and he was in the middle of his second time as the dean of the Guild, which is part of the reason that he was called in as an expert. So this is just to say, when considering these paintings, for example, or any works by Vermeer, we are dealing with an artist who was very concerned with the history of art as it was known in his time. He was a connoisseur. He was the head of a group of artists who were major painters at the time as well. And he was not working in isolation. He was a very active member of the artistic community. And what we see here with these 3 paintings in the exhibition, we see an artist who is exploring a theme. He is aware of what's been done in the past. He feels like he is breaking ground as he works towards the future. And one of the most notable aspects of these paintings, just to say right up front, is the fact that these would be understood as modern figures, to use the contemporary term that he would have used. In other words, figures from his own time. These are not biblical or mythological figures, but figures that would be recognizable to his contemporaries. And that's a further remove from what we, as 21st century viewers, might take them as, because they are historic figures. But if you can step out of that extra historical window, then you can regard these as works that have relevance for being painted from scenes that were locally observed rather than based on ancient text. Now, Vermeer treated the theme of a young woman, Juffrouw, they would be called, and her maid, so the young lady of the house, and her maid 3 times in these 3 paintings. But he treated the letter theme 3 other times, and we think these 3 paintings came before he treated the mistress and maid together. And that's these 3 paintings here, showing a solitary woman reading. We're not always very clear on the dates of Vermeer's paintings. Only 4 of his paintings bear dates, so the rest have been sort of organized chronologically by general agreement among art historians with some various differences of opinion. But generally speaking, I'm showing them in the order that we think he painted them. And if we take a look first at the painting on the left, the one in Dresden, we can see already some interesting things happening. There is this curtain on the side of the painting, which seems in danger of invading our space. It's as much maybe a part of our potential space as it is hers. There's a curtain rod upon which it hangs. And she is deep in thought reading this letter. This letter, notice, the paper's kind of crumpled. This is a letter that she's been reading multiple times. This is a letter that's been handled. And we see her reflection quite wonderfully in this glass pane of the window. He gives us a very subtle alternate view of her, sort of blurred through the distortion of the glass. And of course, in the background, we see this painting of Cupid, which is quite remarkable because it was recently uncovered through a restoration. And here I show you a few years ago, Midway through the restoration, this is Christoph Schützel, the conservator in Dresden, who was responsible for uncovering the Cupid, because it was covered with a layer of white paint at some point in the 18th century, and it was determined that Vermeer originally intended to have this Cupid visible. Previously, we knew about the Cupid from X-rays, but it was assumed that Vermeer changed his mind, painted over the Cupid, and we can now enjoy it as Vermeer intended it. Also note the yellow varnish is gone, so this painting really stands out if you have a chance to see it now. I know some of us are not always thrilled with the new appearance of the Vermeer, but if we embrace it, we can see that he is first of all making very clear the amatory theme. Cupid is, of course, showing us very clearly that these are likely love letters, that this is an affair of the heart involved. What's particularly interesting about the uncovering of the Cupid painting, though, is that we weren't quite aware through the X-rays of the things around Cupid. And what you see him trampling on here is a mask, right? Like from the symbol of the theater. But in this context, we can take it to mean an unmasking of emotion, that these letters, this private moment, right? It's a metaphor for this is this young woman's real unmasked emotion reading this letter. We stand in this position viewing her in a private moment. This is not her public-facing self. This is her private self. And in that sense, the Cupid does serve a very important function. So what is Vermeer doing in this painting with this curtain on the edge? For me, the restoration was particularly interesting because we could finally see what happened at the edges, and I'm showing you an image of the restoration outside of the frame. And what appears to be happening here, take this. It appears that he was building a ledge so that we are looking into the painting, and it's structuring our position as a viewer a little further. And you'll see here there appears to be the base of something here. We knew from the X-rays that there was a curtain covering up a glass Römer, a drinking glass from the time period, and you can see that here. He must have changed his mind as he was painting this. What was also apparent that has not really been remarked on, if you look carefully, you can see a second base of a glass here. And I think that it would be representative of, if I can get the slide to advance, a second glass, which you might just be able to see what I'm talking about. Let's see if I can, here. Okay? So, there are things going on. But why did Vermeer change his mind? It's a little bit unclear. He's thinking about ways to structure our position as viewers in the painting. If you make a painting of this young woman reading a letter, then we're witnessing her in a private moment reading a letter. But if you make it so that we are looking at an artificial frame or curtain and we're looking into this view, then he makes our position as viewers, he privileges our position as viewers, he calls attention to it. We're not just looking at this young woman reading a letter, we are looking at a private moment as voyeurs, in a sense. And these are the types of moments that are not publicly witnessed, right? These are not the types of moments where an artist takes a sketch pad, goes on the street, and witnesses them. These are moments that are unseen, if seen at all, or perhaps a moment that the person writing the letter wishes they could see, right, as they imagine a letter being opened and read. Now, Vermeer did not come up with this idea of thematizing love letters on his own. There was a visual tradition, but there was a renewed interest in the theme in the 1650s, and we think he may have taken inspiration from Gerard ter Borch, who was somebody who was making a lot of these similar figures of young women, of modern figures in contemporary surroundings. And in this case, we know he was actually using his sister as a model, Gesine Terborch, who was a notable artist in her own right. And she deserves more attention, and in fact, she's going to get more attention. There's going to be an exhibition of her finally at the Rijksmuseum coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. But we're not quite sure about the exact dates or who may have influenced whom, but one of the interesting aspects about the relationship between this painting and Vermeer's letters is that is it possible to advance the slide manually? Thank you. They knew each other. We know this from a document. It's an act of surety. It's a legal document that has no artistic consequence, but it is signed by both Terborch and Vermeer the same week that he got married. So it could be that Terborch was in town. It's sometimes been thought that Terborch, who was older, was a possible teacher of Vermeer, but Terborch traveled quite a bit and was based in Zwolle later in his career, and there is no evidence that he did. The teacher of Vermeer remains a great mystery, and there are a number of potential candidates. But there is a kinship between the types of works that they were making. This is Terborch again doing one of these courtship scenes, which he specialized in, which are so wonderful. Interest in depicting, reading, writing, the written word. You also find this in the hands of other artists, like this wonderful painting by Pieter de Hoogh, where a letter or the bit of news is being read aloud. This is something we do not tend to do as much today, but the act of just listening to someone read to you or reading to somebody, it's something we do for children, but why don't we do it for ourselves anymore? It's nice, and you see her kind of leaning into the words being spoken without the effort of having to read them herself. This raises the issue of literacy, and the Netherlands in the 17th century had greatly increasing numbers of literate people. Not everybody was literate. Working class people were more likely to be able to read some text rather than write some text, so there are different types of literacy at the time as well. And perhaps she's not someone who could read herself, but why not? Perhaps she could. It's this idea that letters were shared publicly very often. Letters were reread very often. There was a very different relationship to letter writing. Today, I think of our emails. How many emails do we reread? Well, maybe if we took better care in composing them, they would be worth rereading. But letters were composed. They were designed from the outset to be thought about, to be reread. If you were a scholar, they might be published someday. You could send a letter off, and that was an expectation. That often happened, or a poet, if you sent a letter out. So a very different relationship to the written word generally. These solitary figures, though, these letters, because they're alone, these are thought. This is mental activity. These are not words that are expressed verbally, but that are internalized. And this is the challenge, really, for Vermeer and an artist of his caliber, is to think about what does that look like? How do you create a sort of mental or emotional space for the reading of a letter in a painting? And he does it quite marvelously. This is the much beloved woman in blue reading a letter in the Rijksmuseum. Note that her letter, the edges are crisp. This is a letter she's just received. And he even emphasizes it very slightly because she's in the middle of putting on her jewelry for the day, and the other sheet of the letter, if you can see that on the table, is set on top of the pearls that she's about to put on. In other words, this letter just came in and she just started reading it while she's preparing herself for the day. And Vermeer does this wonderfully. He builds in these subtle clues about the nature of what's going on here, and he gives that information to you in a very understated way. Now, the question that everybody asks about this painting is she pregnant? I've had a few students over the years who've really taken a deep dive on this and learned much more than I have ever learned about this topic. Looking at the visual tradition, looking at contemporary attitudes towards pregnancy, and so forth, they've all come to the conclusion that yes, she's pregnant. So we can perhaps state the obvious. There's nothing wrong with her being pregnant, and there's nothing wrong with a love letter between a married couple. Why? If you take one thing home with you tonight, my wife is here, by the way. This is the third letter writer, the solitary letter writer in that group. Very intriguing because she's looking out at us. And it's difficult to even know what to make of this kind of interaction. She is looking at us perhaps as if we are the lover. Or is this a portrait of a woman who wanted to be portrayed as a letter writer? We don't think Vermeer really did portraits, and perhaps he used a model from his family. We have no idea of any secure likenesses of his wife or daughters. He had 11 children, and there were quite a number of potential models in the household for him to work with, although his eldest would not be quite old enough for this, I don't think. At any rate, there is an interesting parallel with Gabriele Metsu's woman also writing, looking out at the viewer here with her pen held in the air. These dates, I should say, are estimates by the respective scholars who worked on Vermeer and Metsu. So there's not a statement being made here about which one came first. We really don't know. But this is a sort of interesting sort of take on the letter writer as one that is breaking the fourth wall, that looks out at us as a viewer too. This painting comes very close, we think, in date to the Frick's Mistress and Maid. You'll see they're both wearing this ermine-trimmed yellow jacket. The table with the blue tablecloth is very similar. The positioning is very similar. So perhaps the last of his single-figure letter writers segues in to the Frick's Mistress and Maid, which we think is the earliest of the ones to include a maid. I spent quite a bit of time trying to find a 17th century silver inkstand. I was very thrilled when on the Rijksmuseum's website I found this one. I wrote to the curator to ask for more information, only to learn that it was 8 centimeters wide. This is a miniature replica of an inkstand, and it is perhaps meant as a collectible or for a doll's house. We're not sure. But as far as I was able to determine, there is no surviving full-size example of one of these. But what you see here is a holder for the quills, a pot for the ink, and a shaker for the sand that they would use to dry the ink out on the letters here. And these feature in a lot of these paintings. So if you're wondering what those are, that's what we're looking at here. The box that you see was likely a box for storing letters. It's an import item from the East India Company. It probably came from India, and I'm basing that on scholarship that others have carried out. But these are the basic things that you often see on these tables. Now, there was originally a tapestry behind the Frick Mistress and Maid, which is revealed here by infrared reflectography. Vermeer seems to have changed his mind and added a curtain instead. The problem is the curtain is darkened to near black, but there was once a green curtain, and you can see slight traces of it. You see in the folds, the way it cusps a bit here, and you can see it better in person in the galleries if you go take a look at it. But that curtain is very important because it compresses the space, and it also represents this notion that architectural historians call of chamberization, of the dedication of certain rooms, which was very fluid, a little more flexible at the time. There were less dedicated rooms for certain purposes in the 17th century, and you were more likely to partition spaces for certain purposes. What this young woman is doing here, it seems, is that she's trying to find a place to write in private, which brings to mind Virginia Woolf already, a room of one's own. This is what she needs. She needs privacy. And this maid has probably just popped in from behind the curtain to deliver this letter. And you'll see when you stand in front of these paintings, each one has a sort of different size, scale, relationship to the viewer. And what's notable about this one is that these figures are a little more closer to life size. They're larger, and we are sort of placed within this image very cleverly, because slightly from below, but the maid handing the letter, it's almost as if we are being handed the letter. The arm comes out as much to us, or to conceptually to us, this feeling of receiving this letter. The young woman, we don't see her face, but she has very gently put her fingers to her chin. It's a marvelous gesture. It's a very subtle gesture. And even better, my favorite detail of the image is the way she's holding this pen. She's not holding it as if she was writing. She's holding it at the top, and it hovers gently over the paper to keep the ink from touching the paper. She wasn't writing, she was thinking. She was in the process of pondering or trying to find the words to say when the maid comes in to deliver the letter. So there's a very sort of, these narrative possibilities worked into the image, that this is a very active love affair, right? That there's a letter being received as well as written at the same time, that there's concern involved. We know, actually, with a fair degree of certainty, where this painting was in the 17th century during Vermeer's lifetime. We know this from the so-called Discretion sale from 1696. This was the bookbinder, Jacob Discretion, who inherited these works. And the house where he had these paintings still exists today, at Gulden ABC, the ABC. This was his printing house, printing establishment. He went from bookbinder to printer. And in this house, believe it or not, there were 21 Vermeer paintings. So, not since the Rijksmuseum's exhibition were so many paintings by Vermeer in one room. Now it's a cafe. You can have coffee there. And this painting was described as, a Juffrouw, a young lady who's being brought a letter by a maid. It went for a very respectable price of 70 guilders. This, we know from later provenance research, was the painting that's now in the Frick collection. And thanks to the efforts of archival researchers, such as John Michael Montius, we know that this painting belonged to Maria de Knaut and Peter van Rauven, that Discretion had inherited these works through the daughter of de Knaut and van Rauven. And then when she died, he had all of the paintings, and when he died, they all went up for sale. Now, I'm showing you these stills from Girl with Pearl Earring because Peter van Rauven is marvelously played by the late, great Tom Wilkinson here as the sort of swarmy collector who is buying these paintings. The documents suggest that they had a special relationship with Vermeer, that they may have had perhaps a first right of refusal relationship, so that these were not paintings that were necessarily commissioned to look a certain way, but that Vermeer painted, and then perhaps they had a chance to purchase what he was making. But they had a great deal of his surviving paintings, and this is maybe one of the reasons that Vermeer was not more widely known just after his death, was because so many of the paintings were so concentrated in this one collection. At any rate, the wife of Peter van Rauven, Maria de Knaut, who's not even represented in the film, but recent research has revealed that perhaps she may have actually been more of the leading force in this patronage. And that's very interesting. This is research that's just underway by colleagues of mine at the University of Amsterdam and soon to be published, so that stay tuned for that as well. But this is quite significant because of the theme of the paintings. We can also discuss what it means when you have these paintings of women and female viewership. I think this is something that changes matters somewhat as well. So I prefer to call it the Maria de Knaut and Peter van Rauven collection rather than the other way around. The maid, this also was something that Gerard ter Borch may have innovated in bringing the servants into the equation. He tended to be more gender equivalent in his approach. Here you see on the left a painting in the Philadelphia Museum of Art of this soldier writing a letter and the herald or the messenger waiting for him to finish it. Ter Borch has very kindly given us a clue. Scattered on the floor in front of him is an Ace of Hearts card. So this think love letter. And on the right we have what was discovered only in recent decades, a matching painting, same size, and it's in a private collection now, but shows a woman with her maidservant who's carrying this pail. This metal pail was a market pail. This is what maids would often go out into the city to do the shopping with. And here she is about to seal the letter as well. There's it seems safe to say that these were pendants, that these were designed to go together, perhaps even hang together, which is very clever when you think about the letter theme. Here, you know, the magic of letters is that people are interacting across time and space, and here you are hanging them together in a sense. And ter Borch seems to be playing a little bit here. You see this pine plank repair in this table. He's stuck it in the other direction here, just cleverly underneath. And you see some correspondences here with the chimney and the interior. There's also this marvelous pair of paintings in the National Gallery of Ireland, where you see this young couple, also paintings that not only likely hung together, but have been together since the 17th century, we think, because of the shared provenance that they have. Could these have been commissioned? Are these representing actual people who wanted to be represented as a couple exchanging letters? It's difficult to say. We don't have evidence. None of Vermeer's letter writers have a companion piece with a man writing letters, so you know, he's only just doing the one side. But one of the nice details here is that this maid, in this case, is opening up the curtain to the painting, metaphorically revealing just as the young woman is opening the letter. This idea of contents revealed. It's that anticipation, and we've all felt that, right? When we are expecting an email, an important email or an important text message, we know it's important before we receive it, but we don't know what it yet says. It's a very human emotion, this anticipation, this expectation. Vermeer's highlighting this in these works. He's playing with this idea of emotion unfolding before us, which brings us to the Rijksmuseum's marvelous love letter. This is a painting I especially enjoy for the viewpoint because less than half of the canvas is actually taken up with the image of the narrative itself. The rest of it is a storage closet, right? So you see a map hanging on the left here with these wonderful streaky stains on the wall beneath. You see crumpled sheet music on a chair, a discarded scarf. This is not a space where people hung out in. This is a transitional space, maybe a hallway or storage space. But what it does is it really puts us in the position of voyeur. We are in this painting. We are painted into this painting as people who are witnessing something carrying out before us, right? So what are we seeing in the distance here? We see this maid being brought, bringing this letter to this young woman, and we see this wonderful exchange of glances. This young woman is playing a cittern, a musical instrument, and she is looking up at the maid with a rather concerned expression. And the maid has this wonderful hand on her hip, "I told you so," look to her with a smile on her face. And just behind the maid is this fair weather seascape, which in the Dutch emblem tradition is a classic trope for a love affair going smoothly. So it's this reassurance. And I think done with a touch of humor. I think we can easily overlook the fact that Vermeer also is allowed to have a sense of humor. And I think he's playing with that a little bit here too. Now, maids were interesting characters in 17th century Dutch literature. There is this rather strange book called The Seven Devils of Maidservants that was written at the time. And it is 300 pages of complaining about maids. It's the most horrendous reading. I scoured it looking for something about love letters with no luck. But there is a chapter about one of their 7 sins is gossip. You know, they're thieves, they're gluttons, they're, all these terrible things. But they gossip. And then there's this plate which serves as the chapter heading to the plate. And these 2 maids are walking down the street with their market pails. And this demon here is blowing evil thoughts into their ear, which are so bad that the devil himself is shocked at what he's hearing. There was actually a law passed just the following year. This is 1682. In 1683, maybe even under the influence of this book, there was a law passed forbidding servants from gossiping about their employers. So if they heard an argument, for example, between a married couple, they weren't allowed to speak about it. There was actually a legal motion to preserve privacy. Less well known is this other book. It's quite rare. It's called The Seven Angels of Maidservants. Written somewhat later, and it is very clearly almost a chapter by chapter defense, a response to the 7 devils. And this book, reading it, I could not help thinking it was written by a woman. The author is anonymous. We know it was printed by a woman. It's printed by the widow van Damme, printed in Leiden by the widow van Damme. The author is anonymous. But the author, she says, I'll just go with it. She says, well, imagine being cooped up in the house all day. When you finally get out, you can talk to somebody who has the same occupation as you. You can compare notes, pretty much, is what she's saying. What a relief that is to actually talk to another maid about what's going on in your house. I mean, it's necessary, right? It's healthy, she says. There's also a nice passage about delivering messages. Actually, she said, if you send your maids out on errands late at night, they have to fight off the young men on their way back home. The Venus Junkers, she calls them. It's a strange construction, but basically the randy young men, and you have to physically push them off as they're going home. So both sides of the equation here. And we see that also in the visual tradition, even beforehand. We see Nicholas Maas, for example, making these paintings which the whole point of the painting is to show this idle servant who she's asleep. And if you sleep, the cat is going to get the food, everything. And it's very obvious. She's gesturing like, look, she's asleep. You see what I have to deal with here. Peter de Hoogh, I mean, this is a very salubrious image of a young woman, a mistress and maid at the linen closet. In fact, it's hard to say which one is which. There's been a discussion about that. The dress of maids could be actually quite nice. It was up to the mistress of the house to determine the dress of the maids, and they often got the cast-off clothing of the mistress, so they could look quite nice, or they could be told to dress plainly. And there was eventually a sumptuary law passed that dictated that they should not be dressing above their station, or they should not wear too much fancy jewelry. But you see images like this by Peter de Hoogh, quite beautifully, just sort of rendering this maid figure in a courtyard, going about her duties. Vermeer took both sides of the equation as well early in his career. This Maid Asleep, this wonderful painting that's just down the street at the Metropolitan Museum, was called, in the Discia sale, it's called A Drunken Maid Asleep. So I think they took it a step further in the description there. And there is a knocked over wine glass. There's a sense that she's sleeping and that she's overdressed, wearing those earrings and the satin dress that she's wearing. And then you have a painting like The Milkmaid, which is one of these iconic works, which takes this woman and really, he doesn't glorify her, but he gives her such dignity. And it's really just it has a special power of its own, this particular work. So these maids they have multivalence at the time in terms of their perceived character, their cultural perceptions. And we see Vermeer playing with this motif as well. These maids, however, have a very important role in these paintings in that they were the confidants. They were the go-betweens. These were messages being exchanged between households. If you had messages to deliver of any sort, if it was a local message in the same city, for example, you would have your servant deliver that message. If it's going to another city, then there's long-distance post for that, but that's a different story. But these maids in Vermeer's paintings, they're all dressed the same, and they all have kind of the same sort of visage or appearance. And it is possible that he's using a model based on his own, the maidservant in his mother-in-law's house where he lived with his wife. And we actually know her by name. We know her as Tanneken. And we have documents that even reveal a bit of her character. She, for example, is recorded in a deposition as physically protecting Vermeer's pregnant wife from her violent brother, who was mentally deranged and was known for bouts of physical aggression. And the maid actually physically stepped between the violent brother and Katerina during one of these episodes. There's a bequest for money to be left to her in Vermeer's mother-in-law's will as well. And she was obviously a valued member of the household. She was employed in the family in exactly the years that these paintings were made, that feature them made. So it is conceivable that she was used as a model. It's a bit speculative because we don't have a sure likeness of her, but it's a nice thought. Now going to this Dublin painting here, this is a wonderful work in its own right because we see the young woman writing, and we see the maid patiently waiting behind her. She's given equal visual weight, but she is waiting very patiently with this wonderful folded arms gesture and looking out the window. She's giving her mistress space, the mental and emotional space to write. And I'd say she also marks time in this image as well. She's a contrast to the act of writing. She is waiting. And it kind of brings the painting alive. It kind of brings motion to the painting when one person is active and one person is not. The paintwork, if you have not already seen it, take a close look. There are these wonderful blocky passages of paint reflecting light in just the most glorious manner. And he gives us that sense of mental energy again. Her head is down a bit. It's this mental activity that he's really after in this work, which is so fascinating. The painting in the background is quite prominent. The painting itself does not survive, but we can identify the subject matter. It's the finding of Moses. This is the story when the baby Moses is placed in a wicker basket, sent down the river because of the Pharaoh's decree to kill all the Hebrew children. The baby is rescued by the Pharaoh's daughter, who has to keep it a secret, and she's bathing with her handmaidens in the river. She rescues Moses, and it seems fairly clear, to my mind at least, that there's an analogy being built with the confidence between the Pharaoh's daughter and her maidservants, and this young woman and her servant as well. In the foreground, lying on the ground, there is what appears to be a crumpled letter and a stick of sealing wax and a red wax seal. These are kind of, intriguing and mysterious features. Is he suggesting that the young woman has read the letter, cast it to the ground, and furiously writing a response? It's possible, but he leaves a little bit to the imagination. There's been some suggestion among Vermeer scholars about whether or not this is an actual letter or not. Some people have suggested it's a letter writing manual. There were these little manuals that were printed for how to write a good letter that even included sample love letters. But I think it was just a letter that was folded. What we're seeing here is there's this vast collection of letters in the National Archive in London. There's a big project now called the Prize Papers. These were letters in transit that were captured by the British from the late 17th into the early 18th century. And archivists now are in the middle of opening them up and scanning them. So far, They have not really revealed any juicy love letters, I'm sorry to say. But what I found interesting was when you encounter these early modern letters, the folding techniques are just so remarkable. And I'm going to show you a video of an archivist with great dexterity, I should add, opening this letter. But people folded letters in very creative ways. We just don't do this anymore. And they thought about how to encase letters. There were letter locking systems where they could fold letters in ways where they were self-locking. And it just keeps going. All right. I think it's a letter. It makes more sense for the painting also. Now, returning to these letter writing manuals that I suggested, they were very popular. You have, Jean Puget de la Serre's French manual in particular was translated into a great number of languages, including English. I'm showing you an English translation here and a Dutch translation in the 1650s. And these were not so much exact models that you had to follow, but there are sample letters which you could gain inspiration from. So I will show you here. I have to come out to read this a bit. But the man might write, I must of necessity for my own quiet declare the desire which I have to love and serve you, if you judge me worthy of so great an honor. Now, the woman has the more difficult task, because if she's interested, she has to leave the door open just slightly, not too far, right? If she's not interested, it's rather easy. You just say, well, it's up to my parents. and you're done. But she says, I am much obliged to you for the goodwill you witness on my behalf, but I have no other liberty left me except to give you thanks, as I do very humbly. Okay. It can take a while to develop a love affair going along these lines here. Which is what's so fascinating about this phenomenon that happened in 1669. There was this publication called The Letters from a Portuguese Nun, or Letters from a Portuguese Woman, translated into French. The story here is that there was a French cavalier who was fighting in Portugal during their war for independence, and he had a conquest. He seduced a nun. And as he came back to Paris with 5 love letters from her, and he had his friend translate them into French and publish them. It's rather indiscreet. These letters, they are the most sincere outpouring of emotion that existed in print up to that time from a 17th century person. And they were a literary sensation. It was a naked commodification of a heartbroken woman. It created a sensation also in terms of the number of reprints and translations that appeared right away. There was an edition that appeared in Amsterdam within months of the original publication. It appeared to have been a bestseller. And it indicates that there was an enormous desire, a hunger for this sort of material, which tells you where the state of the literature was up to this point, right, to read these letters. They are heart-wrenching to read as well. I mean, this poor woman. But there's a debate today, and it continues, as to whether these letters are real. Was this just a literary construction, an epistolary novel? And it's interesting that as this literary sensation unfolded, people published responses from the Cavalier, right? We found new letters. There's also that. So, and you have that early modern sense of like, well, we'll never know the truth, but let's have fun with it, at any rate. But there's a woman that's been identified and a convent that's been identified, and there are people that argue, okay, well, this obviously must have been written by a real person. How could it be otherwise? And there are people that argue that there's no way this could have happened. If they were not written by a woman, then this author embodied these emotions very convincingly. What's interesting in this context, though, is that this is the same decade that Vermeer is exploring the sort of potential of heartbreak in these paintings, the uncertainty around courtship and the emotions of love. And as I was doing research for this project, it occurred to me that we really don't discuss Ovid enough in relation to these love themes. And Ovid's Ars Amatoria, the Art of Love in particular, was one of the most widely read books in the 17th century. It was already translated into Dutch in the 16th century, and there were so many different translations across the 17th century, including this one into English, which I'm showing you in the center. It was a manual for seduction, and it was considered still very highly relevant and useful. Ovid structured it in 3 major chapters or books. The first 2 are written for men trying to court women. The 3rd chapter is devoted to women on how to seduce a man. And Ovid is a bit of a rogue. These translations left a lot out. For example, the advice on women on which sexual positions you should use is at the very end of book 3, does not appear in most of the Dutch translations. It does in the English translation, printed in Amsterdam, and enormously popular in England, as it turns out. But what's been completely overlooked in relation to the love letter theme is the fact that these Dutch editions of The Art of Love had sample love letters appended to the back of them. They were not part of the original publication. And this one I'm showing you even says, with new letters added, right? It's part of the advertisement on the title page. So, we've been focusing a lot on these proper letter writing manuals, but this is something I would still like to research further to see whether, first of all, this is a particularly Dutch tradition, and just to get a better sense of how these letters relate to the other sort of sample love letters at the time. That's for another day. What I will share with you today is this figure, Jacob Westerbaan, who made an edition, a sort of updated translation of Ovid's Art of Love, which would have been the most likely one that Vermeer and his contemporaries in Delft would have encountered at the time. He was working in the court circles in The Hague. He was a good friend of Constantijn Huygens, who also probably knew Vermeer. So he's a very interesting figure generally. And what's fun about his translation is that he really focuses on the maid. Ovid also focused on the maid, but Ovid being Ovid said things like, make sure your maid is not too good looking or I will have my way with her instead of you, this sort of thing. Westerbaan says slightly different things. If there are any poets here, I apologize. This is my attempt to render 17th century Dutch into rhymed verse in English. Took me much longer than I expected. Though watch closely, you will find a way to summon your lover by means of your maid. You will have the chance to write to and fro. Your letters will remain concealed and can go. No city is ever so guarded or secure that no message or letter sometimes gets through. There are many means to write and deliver. Your maid's bosom will not swell from any letter. One can hide it there, or in her shoe, or her stockings, in case someone happens to make a search of her pockets. What's interesting about Westerbaan's publication is that he makes it clear in his introduction that he's updating Ovid's Ars Amatoria. He said, Ovid was the old boss who described in a time long past how in ancient Rome one might court a woman the best. Well, I thought, why not do so with The Hague in mind? And thus I have Roman clothing torn and sliced for our own peoples, lengthened, shortened, adjusted, and spliced. And from the lessons of that ingenious poet of yore, a new art of love for our youth I have forged. A lot of what Westerbaan is talking about, we actually find in Vermeer's paintings. How to converse as you're courting. Don't drink too much. Vermeer actually thematized this in 2 of his paintings about the importance of moderation in drinking while you're courting your lover. And he even included the emblem of moderation in the stained glass of the window here. These are both wonderful paintings. How to prepare yourself, how to make your appearance right. What is and these are important because Westermann's updating these. We would not do the same things that Ovid is recommending doing. He is making this a very active, useful manual by updating Ovid, and of course, the importance of music. And Westermann updates the instruments that Ovid uses. He says the instruments that Vermeer is using, the clavicymbal, the lute, and so forth. So in many ways, Vermeer is thematizing in his works a lot of the same things that we find in Ovid's Art of Love, and they're not necessarily illustrations of the art of love, but that these are courtship concerns that are of great cultural value that are being written about at the time. Now, in the hands of somebody like Gerard Terborch, and I don't mean to be hard on him, I'm just comparing him to Vermeer, but he stages his figures. There's a playfulness to what he is doing here. And what's great about these two works in particular is that you have someone writing the letter for this, fashion plate young woman here, and the maid's kind of looking over the shoulder, seeing what's going on. And in this one here, she's obviously spent a lot of effort writing this love letter on behalf of this young woman who's checking it out to see how it looks, right? There's a great deal of humor here. Men also get the treatment too. I love this, a little more learned looking figure here, helping this soldier out who's got his helmet tilted back from the effort of writing, kind of advising him, and look at the messenger looking out at us going, you see what I have to deal with here. So, Madame de Sévigné at the time, this right around the time that Vermeer is making his paintings, she made a distinction between the lettres galantes and the lettres d'amour, that these gallant letters, making a distinction between letters that are maybe not as sincere, right, that they are flowery and full of this language, but a lettre d'amour is one which shows the outpouring of emotion, the kind that you see with the letters from the Portuguese nun, and the kind that are distinct from maybe what Terborch is doing here, and perhaps more what Vermeer is depicting in his works. These are women whose emotions he wants us to take seriously. These are hearts that could be fulfilled or broken. And you see him using the maid in this case as an interlocutor, as someone who can reflect and help us see how these emotions play out in these works. What's fascinating also about this time period is that there was an increasing value given to young women for the right to choose their own mates, to choose their own partners. Parental approval was still important, but it became less essential over the course of the century. Vermeer encountered this in his own life. There's a wonderful document, well, not wonderful in a sense, but it's his mother-in-law, future mother-in-law, saying that she did not approve of the match, but she was not going to stand in the way. So that gives you an idea of how this worked, right? She's not going to put her foot down and say, no, I won't let it happen, but she is stating very clearly that she's not happy with it. We don't know exactly the reason why, but we think that Vermeer converted to Catholicism to gain his mother-in-law's approval and to marry into this family, that this could have been a motivating factor. He was raised Protestant, he became a Catholic, we're fairly certain. And perhaps that was a reason, a manner of gaining acceptance. Jacob Westermann also married against the will of his wife's parents. So this sort of thing became perhaps even indirectly thematized in works like this, where carrying out and developing this love affair outside of the eyes of your parents became a way of gaining greater agency in determining your own future. Now, that is one of the reasons that these paintings may have had a particular relevance to viewers at the time who are thinking about the importance of how love takes place, how love unfolds. What do letters mean? Is this person being honest? Do I trust this person? Is this person authentic? And in fact, these are some questions that we can even picture ourselves asking quite often today when we encounter people, when we develop relationships. He calls attention to them by turning them into a work of art that he seeks relevance in his own time. I want to make one last note about the provenance of a couple of these paintings. I'm showing you here this great painting of a baker by Jan Steen. The painting in Dublin, we have this interesting document that just after Vermeer's death, 3 weeks after his death, his wife, Katerina, takes 2 paintings to the local baker. He's not just any baker, he's actually a fairly wealthy baker. He's the master baker of Delft. He owns paintings, he's interested in art. He actually already owns one painting by Vermeer. And she takes 2 paintings to him, one of which is this one, and she settles a debt, an enormous debt, 600 guilders, and it says in the document, for bread. So this, by Montius's calculation, is about 3 years worth of bread for the entire family, with 11 kids in all. And, in 1675, that was 3 years after the disaster year of 1672 when the French invaded, the art market collapsed, things really went downhill. But what's also fascinating about this document is that there's a marginal stipulation that Katerina would like to buy these paintings back if she could by paying in installments to the baker, and the baker agrees to it because he sees how important this is to her. Now, there's no evidence that she ever managed to buy them back. She went bankrupt. She was struggling to raise the 11 kids, of course, without her husband's income. But what is clear is that these 2 paintings were dear to her, that they were possessions in the Vermeer household, that they were paintings that they looked at and appreciated, and even though she had to settle this debt, she wanted these paintings back. The other painting was described as a woman playing a cittern. It was long thought to be this painting in the Kinwood House in London, this wonderful painting of a guitar player. The guitar was a relatively newfangled instrument at the time, coming from Spain and France, and that the supposition was, well, the notary just mistook the instrument. But it seems unlikely. Vermeer's wife was there. She knows the difference between the musical instruments. And we also know, just to moot the point, this painting was in the Decius sale. This painting was owned by Maria de Knauth and Peter van Rauven at the time Vermeer died, and it remained in their possession. If you go through Vermeer's corpus, there is actually only one painting that fits the description of a woman playing cittern, and it's the Love Letter in the Rijksmuseum. So what I propose in the catalog is that this painting, whose provenance previously we had no idea about before the 19th century, that this is very likely the second painting that she traded to the baker that was also dear to her and that she wanted to buy back. And it makes sense. It's also a similar theme. It's this letter theme, and something that was clearly important to Katerina and perhaps Vermeer himself as well. And with that, I hope you enjoy the show, and thank you for your attention. It's been a pleasure.